This week on the Four Rivers Ag Report, you guys grew a bunch of it. Now what are we going to do with it? And we got some white stuff this week. Why does that make me see red? And did someone pull the wool over our eyes? That and more on a very punny Four Rivers Ag Report. The Four Rivers Ag Report is underwritten in part by
the Department of Geology-Geography is a proud sponsor of the Four Rivers Ag Report and provides integrative learning opportunities for students and the community to explore the physical and cultural world, near and far.
Welcome to the Four Rivers Ag Report. I'm Fred Peralta. 14 billion bushels. That's a bunch of corn, even in a year where everything goes right. And this year wasn't a year where everything went right. Well, I did some ciphering, and 14 billion bushels of corn is enough to fill the Willis Tower in Chicago 327 times. Now, if my math is off, and I forgot to carry the one, it still doesn't matter. That's a lot of corn. So, now that it's mostly out of the field and into the bin, what do? Well, we hope there's a market for it, and we ask the people who have a history of knowing what's next. In this case, U of I ag economist Darrel Good. Todd Gleason sat down with Darrel on Monday and has this report.
Well, I think for corn, in most respects, the numbers were pretty much as expected. USDA raised their average yield forecast by 5 bushels per acre, raised their production forecast by 150 million bushels. And then on the consumption side, I think in line with our recent pace of sales, they did raise their export projection by 175 million bushels. Bottom line, didn't change the projection of year-ending stocks very much. And compared to the forecast 2 months ago, they did lower their price projection a bit on corn. On soybeans, again, raised the yield forecast by about 1.8 bushels per acre, which is a sizable increase for beans. Production number went up about 100 million bushels. Export projection also went up, and bottom line, still projecting fairly small year-ending stocks of about 170 million bushels.
USDA lowered the season's average cash price by 30 cents on both ends. It's been pretty clear that farmers did not market their corn crop early. Would you agree with the drop?
I think they're right that, we're going to be in the low to mid $4 range as an average price for this year. Even with some increase in consumption, we're going to have plentiful year-ending stocks. And you might also argue that they're a little bit generous perhaps on their feed projection for corn this year, indicating that with a big crop we'd normally see some residual or unexplained use of corn, but bouncing back as high as they have projected is pretty generous, I think. So I don't see really a change in the overall situation of abundant to surplus stocks and relatively low prices of corn.
Any reason to believe the export market could pick up any more than USDA has been considering at this time?
At this juncture, I don't see a strong indication that it would. If we see prices remain very low and competitive in the world marketplace, there is a chance that would stimulate some increased consumption. Some talk of whether China, for example, might use this period of lower prices to rebuild some inventories. And if they chose to do that, then we might see some bigger sales yet this year. So I think the bottom line is exports could be what I would call substantially larger than projected without changing the bottom line in terms of our inventory of corn. Another 100 million bushels, one way or another, doesn't change us from kind of a surplus to any kind of tightness for this current marketing year.
Is there any good argument that the ethanol figure or the grind for ethanol might be bigger than expected?
At this juncture, no. We have seen a bit of a rebound from last year, which was down because of reduced trade, particularly reduced exports of ethanol. But we're still running below the level of 2 years ago on ethanol production in September and October of this year. Something I think can be made of what EPA decides in terms of their 2014 rulemaking for biofuels, if as rumored that they are going to lower the mandates for renewable fuels. I think that's really going to take some steam out of the E85 momentum that we have, and would argue that we will not augur higher on ethanol crush this year.
But turn your attention to the soybean. You mentioned the 170 million bushel carryout. It's still a pretty tight supply.
There's no question it's tight. Continues what we saw last year following the small crop of 2014, but with continued good demand for soybean meal and soybeans in the export market, we're going to use up most of this year's larger crop. And I think as long as those stocks look to be very tight, prices are going to be supported at much higher levels relative to corn than what we've seen in the past. Moving forward, I think the big question is South American production. The market is anticipating kind of in a big way that production will be large enough to meet strong world demand in the last half of our marketing year. If anything goes wrong with that crop or demand turns out to be stronger than currently projected, then that would suggest that we will need to see an increase in production in soybeans in the U.S. in 2014. So I think we're still kind of on the bubble in terms of soybeans, whether we have to do some rationing yet this marketing year or not. And that uncertainty, I think, at least for the next few months until we get a better handle on South America, is going to support soybean prices and may eventually mean that we need to see higher prices for next year's crop in order to attract a few more bean acres.
At this point, that's not the case, but rather corn is the better economic value for producers to plant.
I think the budgets would indicate in the main producing areas, the heart of the Corn Belt, that corn still pencils out a little higher margin than soybeans. We might see for continuous corn or second-year corn, if people are still anticipating some kind of a yield drag, soybean prices relative to corn might be high enough to pull a few of those acres into soybeans. But at this juncture, I would not envision any kind of substantial shift. And when you recognize that in 2013, we had a lot of acreage of cropland that just did not get planted, suggests that we have the potential for large planted acres combined of corn and soybeans next year. So we may need those acres on soybeans. The question is, will we have too many acres of corn and continue the surplus that we have this year?
The caveat that could drive acreage, however, might be out of Washington, D.C., the Renewable Fuel Standard, or RFS policy.
To some extent, if EPA rulemaking is as rumored, and we do see a cutback in the mandates, and that's upheld by the courts eventually, it does say that we may see some drawdown in terms of the amount of corn needed relative to expectations. But I think that would also be true on biodiesel as well. Would say it would take some of the steam out of this momentum we have on soybean oil consumption for biodiesel. So at the margin, I think EPA policy and how the courts eventually rule on that could be important for both commodities.
I keep being told how nice and pretty a little bit of snow was this week. Yeah, and a grizzly bear is cute too when it's a little newborn. It's only when it gets a little bit more grizzly that you have to worry. Well, Casey Berry is here with news about enough snow just to bite some people. Casey?
Thanks, Fred, and I'm Casey Berry with a look at your farm news for this week. Well, it's official. We've seen our first snowfall of the year. And while it was pretty, it made for some dangerous conditions across the northern half of the state. With all of the beautiful weather we've had recently, not many people were prepared for winter to hit, even if it was only for a day or two. Now, I'd like to take this time to remind you to be prepared. Illinois State Police say it's a good idea for families to prepare for the winter months by prepping a winter weather kit. The kit should include blankets, flashlights, a shovel, a candle, food, and jumper cables. They also say before traveling, check the forecast, let someone know your travel route, and keep your gas tank at least half full. Well, thanks to the precipitation we've had lately, topsoil and subsoil moisture is rising. Topsoil is sitting at 4% very short, 21% short, 72% adequate, and 3% surplus. Subsoil is 5% very short, 39% short, and 56% adequate with no surplus. Now, as for crop conditions, winter wheat is at 1% poor, 20% fair, 71% good, and 8% excellent. Pasture comes in at 13% very poor, 19% poor, 32% fair, 34% good, and 2% excellent. Now that winter weather didn't stick around for long, in fact, we're bumping back up into the 50s for the weekend, which means it would be a good time to get out and harvest those crops. Now, as of November 10th, soybeans are 96% harvested in our district, and corn is only 93% harvested. Across the nation, the USDA says corn growers are still on track for a record high 14 billion bushel production year. About 95 million acres of corn were planted this year, down 2% from last year. But this year, farmers are getting more corn from each acre. This season's yield is expected to average right around 160 bushels per acre, with about a third of the nation expecting record yields. Meat products on grocery store shelves now have detailed labels identifying where that product comes from. And because of these labels, one major beef producer has stopped buying cattle from Canada. However, research is showing that these new labels may not be worth the cost. The U.S. Department of Agriculture implemented a new version of mandatory country of origin labeling. That means producers now have to identify the country the meat was born, raised, and slaughtered in.
In the U.S., it's pretty common for us to import a steer from Mexico. So that animal will be born in Mexico. It would enter a feed yard here in the U.S. and ultimately be slaughtered and processed here in the U.S.
That labeling is costing producers more money. Tyson Foods announced because of the increased cost, it will no longer import certain types of cattle from Canada. Research from Kansas State University and Oklahoma State University shows that these new labels don't increase demand for those products. In fact, most people don't even know these labels existed.
If you're just assessing benefits and cost, it's hard to find evidence for the typical consumer having a benefit here, and yet we know there was cost. So at the end of the day, it looks like it's a net aggregate loss.
The country of origin labeling was first implemented in 2009 and includes fresh produce, fish, shellfish, peanuts, pecans, macadamia nuts, ginseng, beef, pork, lamb, chicken, and goat. One country of origin label that you won't see soon is one from China. A recent audit by the USDA Food Safety Inspection Service indicated that poultry meat slaughtered in China will not be allowed to be exported to the U.S. anytime soon. According to a statement from Senator Chuck Schumer's office, the USDA inspectors found that China's poultry slaughter system is not the equivalent to that of the U.S. Therefore, the meat is not guaranteed to be safe. The inspection came about from a 2010 request from China, and the country will have to fix the problems identified before a new certification audit can take place. The Illinois Soybean Association will honor 5 soybean industry leaders in Bloomington, Illinois on November 25th. Honorees are acknowledged in 5 areas that have an impact on soybean profitability. Among the honorees are Colonel Mark Deschenes, District Commander for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Rock Island District, who helped keep the Mississippi passable during the last couple of years. Fred Bellows, a University of Illinois plant physiology professor, Gene Payne, President, Illinois Fertilizer and Chemical Association, and the retired Director of Illinois Department of Agriculture, Tom Jennings. An Elkhorn, Iowa man is being called a different kind of war veteran. Rick Burns didn't fire guns or disarm bombs, but he worked as an Army Civil Affairs officer to understand and help citizens caught up in the war on terror. And after 3 tours, he plans to continue helping Afghans and Iraqi people by giving them something that they can really use: farm goats. A goat to a family in these war-torn areas can mean the difference between starvation and family success. The plan is for people in Afghanistan to pay it forward. The program will give 2 goats to each of 15 families for a total of 30 goats, and each family will collect milk, make yogurt, and pass on the goat's offspring to another needy family who will do the same. Lettuce grown in fish poo? You've got to be kidding me. Well, it's the latest in food production called aquaponics. Maine's Fluid Farms has found a way to raise both tilapia and leafy greens in the water pond greenhouse. The farm's unique system filters the fish waste and creates the fertilizer that flows into the vegetable's root system.
It's very conservative in terms of water usage. You don't have to use chemical fertilizers.
The process is pretty new and the water farmers are still working out the kinks. Right now, they're figuring out how to sustain their greenhouse into the winter months. Finally tonight, never mind jewels and priceless works of art. Some people will steal anything, including possibly the shirt that would have been on your back. First in California, bandits made off with over 140,000 pounds of walnuts. Peanuts, you say? Well, nuts to you. The walnuts were worth about $400,000. An easy case to crack? Well, it should be, because 140,000 pounds of walnuts would require several truckloads. Now let's hope these crooks get caught and we'll be cracking rocks, not nuts. And in the running for the most ironic agricultural robbery ever, police in southwest England appealed for help Tuesday in tracking down thieves who made off with 160 sheep from a field near the village of, wait for it, Wool. Police say the sheep were stolen between Saturday and Monday and that the thieves would have needed a large vehicle to move the haul. Crime may not pay, but it can be warm and fluffy. Let's hope they catch the bad guys soon. Well, that's all for this week. Until next time, I'm Casey Berry.
And this week on Under the Four River Sky, Cameron Craig is joining me today. Cameron Craig, the WEIU contributor and weather guru, and Cameron,
everything else listed underneath that, right?
Other duties assigned, right. And Cameron, this week we've had some weather that really kind of blew my mind.
Across the world we have the super typhoon Haiyan, and then the snow event here in the Midwest.
Right. Now, super typhoon Haiyan, that was the worst recorded storm in history?
Well, as far as recorded history is concerned, or within modern period, because we don't know of other hurricanes that could have been around prior to the 1900s.
So what defined, I mean, why, how, winds were what?
The gusts were up to 235 miles per hour.
Okay.
And then the sustained winds were 195 miles per hour. So that is just beyond what we categorize our Atlantic storms.
So how did this storm get made?
The essential ingredient here was extremely warm surface water.
Okay.
Just like warmer than bathtub water, essentially. Okay. And so all of that convection and all that extra moisture allowed this super typhoon to develop. Now, what people need to understand is that a hurricane is the same as a typhoon, is the same as a cyclone. The difference is the geography.
Okay.
So hurricanes are in the Atlantic, typhoons are in the Pacific, and then cyclones are in the Indian Ocean.
Why?
To keep so people understand that if we call all of these storms in all the oceans hurricanes, people are like, okay, which one? Where's it at?
Okay.
So it's geography.
So it's more of a geocentric locator than
right. Exactly.
Okay. So 235 miles per hour wind, that water had, I mean...
We're talking Indy 500 speeds here.
Right. So that water is, you said the water is really warm. It was where? Where is that water?
In the Central Pacific.
Okay.
And it was trailing across the Central Pacific all the way into the Philippines.
Okay.
All right. So that, and the open water access allowed the typhoon to develop beyond what we can understand, and then as it went over the Philippines, it really didn't get a chance. I mean, it didn't die off. It continued to gain speed into and then southern China.
Some really horrific pictures that we're seeing right now.
It's very sad.
So, am I mistaken? Is this the same warm water that creates the El Nino, La Ninas that affects us?
Yes and no. It's but the thing is that right now we're in an ENSO neutral situation.
Okay.
There's neither La Nina or El Nino. It's neutral, and it's expected to stay neutral through spring.
Okay.
So we refer to these as teleconnections. Something that happens in the Central Pacific could influence our weather here in the United States and Europe and Asia, etc. But this was that's just warm water in the Pacific.
And caused by the usual suspects, you believe?
Yeah, I think this is again, these are extreme storms. Last year, Sandy being so far north, and then Irene, and then this situation. We're looking for, these are pieces of the pie. I truly believe these are pieces of the pie that explain that climate change is here.
Yeah. Speaking of climate change, we all know my aversion to white and fluffy.
Yes, the SNOW.
Yes, that word, that which we shall not speak, but we saw it this week.
That's right, but you know, the thing is people are like, well, this is so unusual. It's not unusual. In October of 1913, it was the snowiest October.
Okay.
1 inch.
1 inch?
One inch here in Charleston, 1913. And then in 1975, we had almost 11 inches in November.
Now, I should know better. I was around in 1975, and I don't remember that. That's how much I had. So this is not unusual to get snow this time of year.
Right.
The amount of snow we got was negligible at best.
Right.
You know,
half inch in Champaign, and then less as we go south.
Right. But are we likely to see this? You know, is this a pattern?
Well, let's not go there.
Oh, come on.
Well, we could see, occasional snowfall because it's the temperatures, and we're fluctuating. Just, we're going to hit warm this weekend, and then it's going to be warm to start the work week, and then we could see another snowfall, next weekend. So, but we're just going to stay, within the 7-day period of forecasting.
Okay, so your crystal ball is more like a bowling ball.
That's right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, you rub that.
I will. I will
clean
try
that
to
up a little
polish
bit and see what we can find out. Okay.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Cameron.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jessica Killo with your Inside Extension. With the anticipation of the holidays, there can also be feelings of dread. After all, how are you going to get everything done on an already busy schedule? According to U of I Extension Family Life Educator Sherry Burcham, the extensive preparations many engage in to pull off those picture-perfect holidays create so much stress that they can't even enjoy themselves. Visit our website for great tips on managing holiday stress. Winter is quickly approaching, and some of us have already gotten frost. Some vegetables, such as lettuce, carrots, spinach, and a few others, are frost tolerant. In fact, their flavors can even be enhanced by frost. However, many vegetables need to be protected from the frost. Go to our website to find tips and tricks for protecting your garden from frost. As always, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and visit our website to stay up to date on our programming. From U of I Extension serving Coles, Cumberland, Moultrie, Douglas, and Shelby counties, this has been Jessica Killo with your Inside Extension.
Did you know soil is the engine of farm production?
But how do you know if it's functioning at its full potential?
By using this tool. Look at this residue.
Oh, there's an earthworm right there near the surface.
Look at all the holes. Wow, look at the little BBs. Looks like cottage cheese.
Roots are going straight down. Lots of pores in that soil. That's what healthy soil should look like. It only takes a minute.
If you dig a little, you'll learn a lot about the health and productivity of your soil.
And to close the show out this week, we heard of a family farm in Maine that's being sold after 11 generations. Members of the Tuttle family own the 135-acre farm in Dover since 1632, one of America's oldest continuously operated family farms. Now, this generation tried a lot of things to modernize the farm. Year-round fruit and meat stand, diversifying gourmet cheeses and things. But they realized that farming into a 12th generation was just not going to work. So it was sold to a neighbor, and the plaque will be posted there honoring the 380 years that the Tuttles farmed the land. But as any family who sells a farm will tell you, it's not the same as looking forward to every spring and back on every fall. Well, that's it for this week. Work hard, be safe, and enjoy the beautiful sunsets. I'm Fred Peralta, and thanks for watching the Four Rivers Ag Report. The Four Rivers Ag Report is underwritten in part by
The Department of Geology-Geography is a proud sponsor of the Four Rivers Ag Report and provides integrative learning opportunities for students and the community to explore the physical and cultural world near and far.